Okay. Very cool. Well, I'll just minimize this for the moment. Oh. Sorry, this. Where's closed there? Where's closed cache? Where is the closed captioning? I want to shut it off. Well, maybe it's over here. Captions. Hide captions. There we go. All right. Well, Brian, at least I know where my PowerPoint file is.
You're good.
Today.
You're good.
Well, now I need to.
Just think, all the worst things that could go wrong this weekend are already in the past and gone right.
It's
from here on in,
so
your
true.
Stress should be low.
So, I am very
Nothing
low
really bad can
stress.
happen from this point.
I am very low stress, so.
Actually, Bill, it just says on this.
Actually, Bill, you're in trouble right now.
No. It says on this newest paper here, it says arrival in Berlin, Germany, tour group will be met at the airport and assisted with arrival procedures, transfer to local hotel. So, hard to get.
Oh.
But even so people might be arriving on different flights, that's still.
Usually, when they arrange it, they get everybody's
They figure
flight
it out.
thing and they figure it out.
I don't know.
But we've started a question there, so we'll get that squared. And then, yeah, so why don't we also do the next get together? I'm thinking will be 2 weeks from today. I know unless we can do a Wednesday. So not this Wednesday, but a week from Wednesdays, because my schedule is I'm gone next weekend for Sandy's mom's service in California, her graveside burial service. She'll have a service here on the 19th, but so we leave Saturday morning and I don't get back till Monday night. So I'm gone next Sunday, so we can't do this typical time, which I think works really well. So we can't meet next Sunday, in other words, and we can't meet next Monday, because I know some of us talked about Monday being workable. But the question would be, do we have any choir people here? Yeah, we have a number of choir people, so we don't want to meet on Wednesday. Or Tuesday. Tuesday's certainly workable for me, is, you know, if we did, just because I'm thinking we're running out of time, if we did a week from this Tuesday.
The October 8th.
Tuesday,
Probably gonna be the best. Yeah.
and try what did we say? Did we say we could do a 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock? Amy, that messes with
I could be here even at 4.
even at 4.
Well, I can't be here till.
I can't. I
I was
help that day. I was at an appointment.
Okay, no, that's okay, but could
Yeah.
you do an evening?
I could do 5.
evening.
5, 6,
Uh,
6 o'clock? Can we do 6?
I could do 6.
6?
We're talking the 8th.
The 8th, Tuesday, the 8th, and then I'll want to do the next Sunday as well. And I won't I'll try not to overdo it, but I want to get you.
Maybe I could Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can zoom in.
Because I'll be in Chesapeake.
Yeah,
then I'll be out of town too, so I can zoom in.
okay, perfect.
And then that next Sunday,
Then the next Sunday is,
So the 6th,
the 8th.
or the 8th at
At 5
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
The 8th at 6.
And then
8th at 6 o'clock. Oh, I should be, did I start recording yet? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Didn't I? Okay, good. So we're recording. Yeah,
But how will that work for
and then the
people?
that's good. They're gonna miss that Tuesday
Okay.
night probably, unless they want to stay up late,
Or
Okay.
they can
9
watch it
o'clock.
next day.
or they can watch it, you know, on the
9
recording.
o'clock.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Sunday.
So Dan and George will, you know, it'll be 9 o'clock PM their time on the 8th of October.
Okay, so you say, and then the 13th.
And then the 13th, is Sunday, the 13th?
Sunday.
It's my wife's
Seems like
birthday.
something else.
Oh,
That's okay.
October, that's at 12:30.
That's the potluck dinner in the evening of 5, but that's the
Well, we
17th
can
is
meet.
potluck.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
meet after.
I'm gonna be busy. so
On what
yeah,
night?
We can't do it that night. The
Not at
13th.
night,
No,
not at night. No, it would be
after
right
church.
after church.
Yeah,
that
after
day.
church.
There's also a little bit of a conflict that I think with that, although I think we're proceeding with the potluck.
Yeah.
It's a big youth that was already on the calendar on the 13th, so, but anyway, I don't, all I know is there was conversation going about that. But I'm sure it's still happening, so, so we'll meet right after church on the 13th. And then maybe just one more, so if we can get 3 more in before we leave, that'd be awesome. Okay, all right, very cool. All right, well, let's keep rolling here. And where we're at, we're front loading. We're gonna move this up here. So we're looking at the places and content of the Reformation. We've done Luther's early call, you know, and the thunderstorm and all of that, and set up you with his childhood and, you know, things that last time we kind of did the 95 Theses and the beginning of the firestorm that led up to the Diet of Worms, which is kind of where we're gonna zero in on today. But before we do that, I want to just give you some more people to look at. This is a painting of Frederick the Wise, the elector that protected Luther in his first part of his life. There would be 2 other electors after this Frederick dies, and they all were very sympathetic. In fact, even more, they weren't as politically savvy as Frederick the Wise was. But he's the one that really saves the Reformation, and because he saves Martin Luther from being killed. So that's an important face just to have. And this is his question: how do I protect Luther and also avoid imperial demands to hand Luther over? He has to do this really delicate political juggling.
They handle it really well.
Yes.
They portray it really
Peter Ustinov plays Frederick the Wise, and he does a beautiful job. Now, we don't know if they ever even met, Luther and Frederick the Wise. You just can't imagine they didn't. And in the movie, they have this great scene where Luther brings Frederick the Wise the Bible, you know, and so, but Peter Ustinov does I mean, they couldn't have had a better actor for that part. So that's the delicate thing that he's struggling with. So after the Diet of Worms, Emperor Charles, who I'll put up here, that's the Pope, but let's get Emperor here. I'll come back. I've got a picture of Emperor Charles somewhere. Where are you? There he is. There's Charles V, young guy, huh?
He looks very good.
Yeah, yeah. This is the way things worked. And so this is the Pope, Pope Leo X. And I think, Tom, you had the question of where did his trip to Rome coincide with his doctorate? And I think he gets his doctorate after he's back from Rome, but he's enrolled.
Well, is it really right in English?
No, this is just a fun little slide.
I was impressed.
But the language is correct. So, but before we get to the Diet of Worms, let's talk about what happened. So isn't that where we left off? We were at the Diet of Worms and Here I Stand. Did we get to Here I Stand last time? Anyway, we'll pick it up there. So Luther is called before this big church meeting. Let's see. No, I thought I had a picture of, yeah, there we go. This is a famous picture of him before the emperor there on the left, and he's got his hands on his writings, and he's, you know, under the gun and under, you know, the big inquiry and trial in essence. And so again, Luther goes there thinking he'll have a chance to have a say and have a conversation and work things through. And all he's really asked is whether you'll recant your works. And they have all of his writings, many of them. And we're going to read a little bit from one of them called The Babylonian Exile of the Church. And he's asked to recant those, and he says, well, there's all different kinds of writings, and how do I know? I can't, some of it's just devotional, great Christian word. I can't renounce those. And yes, some stuff I've written too harshly, and he admits that, which is cool. But ultimately, after kind of, some people say he chickened out the first night, but he asked for more time to consider once he's knows what's being asked of him. And so he has a long, difficult night, and the next morning he goes in and he then tells his famous speech about not recanting, and then here I stand, I can do no other. But what he says is, my conscience is bound captive to the word of God. Now, for us, especially Protestant Christians, that's like, yeah, that's pretty basic, but in his day, really, he'd be captive to the church and the church's authority. And that's really what he's found himself in, and he knows it now. By this time, he does know it, even though I think he holds out some hope that, you know, reconciliation can happen. So, we've got, after he makes that statement, we get the edict of Worms by Emperor Charles. For this reason, we forbid anyone from this time forward to dare, either by words or by deeds, to receive, defend, sustain, or favor the said Martin Luther. On the contrary, we want him to be apprehended and punished as a notorious heretic. So after Worms, even though he's promised safe conduct, he's a wanted man. Anybody could go up and kill him without any recourse. They could capture him. I don't know if there was a reward. I'm sure there probably would have been some great benefit, you know. But for the rest of his life, Luther is under a death sentence. And I think sometimes we forget that. I will tell you that, notice it says it forbids anyone else to help him. So if you helped Martin Luther, you could be killed. And in fact, there were numerous people who were sympathetic to Luther and helped him that were captured and burned at the stake and killed. So many people lost their lives because of their association with Luther. And you'll probably hear more about some of those. Now, of course, right alongside this is the Pope. And I'm also teaching a foundations class right now. So, and we just got done doing Luther. So I'm trying to sort in my mind what I said and what I haven't said. So if I repeat stuff, I apologize. But you need to understand that the emperor was the civil ruler and was a devout Catholic. He was a person of the church, but the Pope was the ruler of all Christendom in the West. And Charles and the Pope would butt heads. It wasn't a copacetic kind of getting along, because the Pope wants to get in Charles's affairs. And Charles doesn't want the Pope having that authority. I don't know if you know this, but Charles takes his troops into Rome and sacks Rome to put the Pope back in his place. So there wasn't this like all copacetic, you know, togetherness, but Charles is a person of the church. And even though he goes to war literally with the Pope during Luther's lifetime, he still is, you know, no, we got the church and his rule. And so that's important. But Pope Leo now, he not only is that Charles with the Edict of Worms, now the Pope puts him under the ban, and basically has already actually said, you're a heretic, you're out, and you got one last chance at Worms. And Luther did not avail him of that last chance. So yeah, please.
How did Frederick the Wise escape the same judgment?
Exactly. So because he's one elector and Emperor Charles has to keep him happy. So, and yeah, the tension with the Pope is, but again, it's all politics, and the Pope isn't gonna condemn this elector of this incredibly important province in in what we know as Germany. So, but they had to be secret about it. So there was a delicate dance. And this is why, like I think I meant, like I just mentioned, that we don't know that Frederick and Luther ever met. Think about it, same town. All this, but we have no record that they ever actually talked. And I think that's probably why.
So they had to maintain a certain amount of anonymity and.
Yes, that's correct. A certain distance. Now, eventually, after Luther dies, Emperor Charles says enough's enough, and he does invade and destroys and wins the war and against this what's called the Smalcald League. So it does happen, but Frederick the Wise's successors were not as politically savvy. They were more in the face, more we're taking you on, Charles, and they actually should have won the war, but they had stronger forces, but Spanish troops swept in and won the victory. So yeah. So how did he escape it? That's a great question, because he's also a big supporter of the church too. He's got the biggest Emperor Frederick the Wise's. He's got the biggest collection of relics in all of Europe, in Wittenberg, and would bring them out every All Saints Eve day. And so the fact that coincides with the 95 Theses, which was about indulgences and not relics, but relics will quickly come under Luther's, attack the
So
same way.
having a bunch of, the most relics, does that give him a little bit of more credibility or?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Electors, that's important.
Yes, but then politically, the fact that he was one vote of 7 or 8 or 9, I
Yeah.
forget however, was like the Emperor Charles just can't,
Yeah.
so it was a political game. So, let's see, Luther's called in the Edict of Worms obstinate, schismatic, and a manifest heretic. And that is a copy of the Edict of Worms, as I remember. But a surprise move by Frederick. What's that going to be? So Luther's now a heretic, and there's this Edict of Worms. So he's a wanted man. He's in trouble. So what happens is on his way back from the Edict of Worms, Frederick the Wise, no one knew this though, and Luther didn't either, as Luther's riding back, kidnaps Luther. And as far as Luther knows, he's going to be killed. He doesn't know who's kidnapping him. But it turns out Frederick the Wise kidnapped him, and no one else knew this. Because again, if the Emperor Charles knew this or the Pope knew this, so this was all hush hush. So the Frederick the Wise captures Luther, and he takes him to the Wartburg Castle, which we will go see. And this is the place then that Luther's hidden out for 9 months. This is what he looked like during that time. His name was Junker George, I think. And he grew his beard and his hair, and he was in disguise. And there's some legends, and I guess there's some historical that he would go down into some of the bars, because Eisenach is right there by the Wartburg Castle, and listen to what people were saying about him, and all the gossip and all the talk and this type of thing. And it drove Luther nuts. I think Luther was a very corporate people person. one of the big parts of the writings we have of Luther are not Luther himself writing, but his students writing down what he said. They're called table talk. Now, a lot of scholars question, how accurate they are, but it's actually some of the most colorful, really cool stuff. Because, his students were writing down what they were saying. So he's a very big people person, but when he's stowed away at this castle, he's really struggles, but he puts himself to work. And as I think we talked about, he translates, and you'll get to see this desk, I believe, and I believe this is what is understood to be one of the desks where he worked. He got from his buddy Philip Melanchthon in Wittenberg the Greek New Testament by Erasmus of Rotterdam, who was the big European scholar who had taken the best Greek manuscripts they had and took all the variants, took all of it, and created one Greek New Testament that's in print. So this is the first one in print. So these others were hand copies that they had, but then he created a Greek New Testament that would be printed. Now, amazingly, it had so many errors that it went through like 7 different editings, and there's some really fun stuff. Andrew, yeah.
So why was he allowed to leave free? They condemned him to be a heretic.
They had promised to get him there. They had promised.
Free, and then if we see you again, then you're.
That's correct. A safe conduct. To get him there, they had promised him safe conduct. But the reason Frederick the Wise kidnaps him is because he doesn't think he'll make it back to Germany. Because even though they had promised him safe conduct to and from,
They weren't gonna hold their word.
Because Huss
And
has.
he's Frederick the Wise, not Frederick the Naive.
Yeah. Thank you. That's perfect, Brian. Frederick, the politically savvy, knows how the world works. Not the naive. Absolutely. So that's a great question, Andrew. And like I say, Johann Huss, who was I think it was Hungarian, not.
Wasn't Czech?
Czech. Thank you. I knew I was just completely off. 100 years was basically promised safe conduct, and he didn't get safe conduct, and he was
Did
killed.
Luther's wife know that he had been kidnapped? But,
Not married yet.
oh, not
Nope,
married yet.
nope,
Okay.
yeah,
I need to
yeah.
read the thing.
No, that's all right. Perfect. She did not know. But you know what? She will go through many a sleepless nights worried about Luther. I'll try and find some examples of their letters,
Okay.
because we've got all their letters that they wrote back and forth, and it's really quite endearing to hear those letters. But she worried immensely about him all the time. Yeah. So Luther's up there in the Wartburg Castle, and he starts translating the group from using Erasmus's printed Greek New Testament and into German. And I think, again, this is where I get confused. Did you have?
No,
No.
something wrong.
That's okay. What I was told when I was there back in 16, is that, we think about him translating from Greek into German as if there was a German language.
Mhm.
And there really wasn't, from what I understand. There were all these dialects and
I think Melanchthon was one of the primary developers in German.
it's very likely. But Melanchthon was the great scholar and systematician, and Luther's writing back and forth, asking Melanchthon questions, because Melanchthon was probably a better Greek student than Luther. And so even though Luther did this, he did it in conversation and, work with as many people as he could engage to help him. But what they say is that Luther created the German language, that he pulled all these different dialects and all these different things, and that German Bible, Luther's Bible, really was the basis for what we know as German today. Now, even today, there's a high German and a low German, I think, at least when I was. Yeah, and they're not they're a little bit harder to understand, right? Yeah, and my folks in Lodi, they would say, well, we speak Low German, this High German stuff. I'm like, well, I obviously wouldn't know the difference, but, so Luther, that's the big accomplishment, but he's also he's already written lots of stuff. These 3 great writings on Christian liberty, which we looked at last time a little bit, the Babylonian Captivity of the Church, which, like I said, I do want to read a little bit from. Did you guys did Russ, when he sent it, did it have the attachment? So you were able to,
Second time.
No, he just
Yeah.
resent it.
He resent it.
he
Yeah.
just resent. Okay, so
And
now,
that's it. Yeah.
if you want to read the super long,
Mhm.
but if you don't, it's fine. It's just, everybody's different and, and I'm gonna read a little bit of that today, but. Okay, so now, what else is happening? This is really important. This is where what's called the Radical Reformation gets going. These are reformers that wanted to go further. Julie brought her book that Russ sent, which is, thank you. Can you grab that for me? I need to pour over this because I have not read it yet. But has anybody else read it? Yeah, what'd you think?
I mean, it's
Just kind of,
read through the basics.
just
Like,
quick basic, yeah. I know they list the more radical reformers here. So this looks good and a helpful thing. So the names that you want to think about are Karlstadt, Bodenstein Karlstadt, who was a fellow teacher of Luther's and then kind of a student of Luther's. And hey, what did they say? Power abhors a vacuum. Well, there's a vacuum now. And some of these radical reformers really start fanning and whipping the flames and going things. And one of the things they started to do was destroy all the icons in the churches. This is where we get the term iconoclast, which is a term for, somebody who's an iconoclast likes to destroy what other people think is sacred. That's what an iconoclast is. But they actually were destroying all the artwork in the churches. This gets to Luther's ears, and it's one of the things that says, I cannot stay in exile any longer. I have to engage. I have to stop this. And he goes back to Wittenberg and preaches like 3 sermons and just, stop. This is, and to this day, it's really fun because we have a rich variety of Protestant backgrounds and Catholic backgrounds here in this group. To this day, we see these differences around art and you look at church architecture, and Lutherans have walked this interesting place where we still have had lots of stained glass and all of that stuff, but not so many statues. Although in my home, not my home church, but my Missouri Synod Church had a big Christus Victor cross. It was beautiful, huge. The Christus Victor cross is not the crucified Christ on the cross, but the King Jesus, triumphant on the cross. But in my last congregation, they had the picture of Jesus. You've seen it. He's like this, and it was on this Gothic altar that they had in their first church, but then they moved and they built a totally different kind of church, but they brought Jesus. And he didn't fit. I mean, they're what, in a Gothic, you got all the background and there's Jesus, but Jesus was always standing above everybody's wedding pictures and everybody's, and so, after I was there, I had so many people say, why do you worship the statue? I had all kinds of confusion. And I said, no, it's just a statue of Jesus. And it's really important to people, but there were so many questions and he didn't fit. So, I got rid of Jesus. That was my big accomplishment. What you do at Emmanuel Lutheran Lodi, I got rid of Jesus. No, we put him in the narthex for a while, but he was also crumbling and he was in bad shape. So, but anyway, so typically Lutherans have kind of walked this interesting middle ground on some of this. So, but the radical reformers got rid of all that artwork because, oh, you're worshiping it. An icon, and even today, you've got icons in the East where you don't worship that, but you kind of worship through it, and it can communicate. It's really interesting. In the West, we struggle. If you want to understand icons, you definitely visit the Eastern Orthodox churches and amazing, beautiful stuff. But Luther said, art is great. It preaches. If because people were illiterate, right? So you had stained glass windows that told the story. That's great. And to this day, we embrace art. We embrace music. Some of the radical reformers have no musical instruments today because it's not in the New Testament. And so it's like, what you need to know about the Reformation is that people went way further than Luther. And Luther will get from both sides, from Rome and the more radical reformers. And he'll fire the missiles back. So during the Wartburg Castle time, crazy stuff gets going. And so Luther has to come back and kind of get back in control and just take the risk of being killed. And he basically was held up then in Wittenberg. When we get to the Diet of Augsburg, he wasn't there. Why? Because he would have never made it out. So, he had to stay close to home. He had to stay within Frederick or Frederick's successors, geographical bounds. And can you imagine the power that they had to keep Luther safe? That, you cannot come into my area and grab Luther, so it's quite something. So that's really important. The Wartburg Castle we're going to see, and it's right close by where Luther was born. I think we're in that same area. So that will be a fun visit. It's a cool castle. It's there today. There's a lot of history in this castle, way beyond not just Luther, but he's probably the most famous part of it. Let's see. Bible, radical Reformation. The other thing that starts happening during this time is pretty soon on the heels of all this is what's known as the Peasants' War, which we'll talk about next time, because it's a really fascinating and important thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. And when you go over I want to see if it's on the Diet of Worms, German Bible, Luther returns to Wittenberg. Luther marries, German Mass, Marburg Colloquy. We're going to talk about that. Diet of Augsburg. So see, and this is a great little overview, but it's not mentioned. But we're gonna talk about the Peasants' War because it's a really huge event. By the way, here's Philip Melanchthon. Philip Melanchthon is a young scholar. He never is ordained. He's a scholar, teacher, but he never is ordained. And he was Luther's right-hand kind of man, you could say, and just incredibly brilliant, but a completely different personality. Melanchthon was like, let's get along, let's make peace. He really struggled with Luther, especially Luther as he got older and more, frankly, bitter and frustrated with Rome. He tried to keep Luther, like, let's bring it back a little bit, this type of thing. So he had a different take on things and really worked on trying to reconcile with Rome longer than Luther did. But Philip Melanchthon, really important person. This is George Spalatin, Luther's mentor in the Augustinian order that we've talked about. Again, just trying to get these names so when you hear them on our trip, you'll know some about that. George Spalatin, really important. So, but let's take a little time here to read from one of these famous writings that has got Luther in such trouble. Does that sound good? Let's do it. All right. Let me share screen to get to my other program right here. All right. And now I think I can get this bigger so that the recording, I did press record. Yes. Okay. Okay. So let's see, where do I want to go here? So this is called the Babylonian Captivity of the Church. Let's see, maybe go to the intro here. Well, so let's see. Let me go all the way to the front of it, and then I'll really scoot down to what I've highlighted because I just want to see. So, because it's kind of cool at the beginning. Sorry, it's a really long situation. So what Luther takes on in this writing, and you could, well, first, I don't want to assume you know what the Babylonian captivity was. So Old Testament history. People of Israel. You got King David, King Solomon, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians wipe out the northern tribes, northern Israel. There's been a separation in Israel. And then you just had Judah and Benjamin, but mainly Judah. That's where the term Jews comes from, because, people ask me today, well, do people in Israel today know which tribe they're from? Well, they're all Jews. They're all from Judah. The other tribes we don't know. Now, I know some people are trying to recover that, so to speak, but after the Assyrians wipe out the north, there really isn't they're called the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes or whatever. They just get assimilated and wipe out, but Judah hangs on until the Babylonians wipe them off and takes them to exile in Babylon. So Luther's taking a play on this. And now he's saying the church has been taken away out into exile. By who? Rome. It's the Pope and the Roman system, etc., that has actually taken the church into exile. And so the church needs to be set free to go back home. So he uses that as a metaphor, as an analogy to what's happening in the church. And one of those things is the way they understand the Lord's Supper as a sacrifice versus a sacrament. And there's a difference. Let me just get here. Let's see. And one of the things that was characteristic of the church being in exile is that they only gave communion to the people in one kind. So if you ever hear this on our trip, there's two kinds. What are the two kinds? The cup and the bread. They only got the bread, and for various reasons. And Luther said this is completely wrong. And so in this Babylonian captivity, he takes on that subject and really, hammers it out. So let's see here. Here we go. This is just the way it's begun. Martin Luther, Augustinian, to his friend Herman Tulloch, greeting. Whether I wish it or not, I am compelled to become more learned every day, with so many and such able masters eagerly driving me on and making me work. Some 2 years ago, I wrote on indulgences, but in such a way that I now deeply regret having published that little book. Why? Let's keep going. At that time, I still clung with a mighty superstition to the tyranny of Rome. So you remember how I said when he wrote the 95 Theses, he's like, let's talk about this, let's get this resolved. He thinks it's resolvable. Does he think that now? Not so much. Okay, so so that I held that indulgences should not be altogether rejected, seeing that they were approved by the common consent of so many. So Luther's like, man, so many people are okay with this. What must be wrong with me? So maybe we just need to reform things. No wonder, for at the time I was still engaged single-handed in this Sisyphean task, which I think like sissy task or something, you know,
Pushing the rock.
pushing. Oh, that's right. That's right. The Greek,
You get up to the top.
and it just keeps rolling back.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Brian. That's right. This is Greek mythology here. Yeah. So I was thinking like
Not
the sissy
Susie.
task. It sounded good to, but no, this is, Brian obviously is perfect. So yeah, think about Luther's like, I'm just trying to push this rock up. There's a bigger problem than indulgences. I can work on indulgences till the cows come home. Afterwards, thanks to Sylvester, and I think this is appears more properly called Mazzolini from was a prior of the Dominicans. He became a grand inquisitor and censor of books in 1515. He and others of the order, Tetzel and written against Luther. So thanks to an opponent of Luther's and aided by those friars who so strenuously defended indulgences, I saw that they were nothing but impostors of the Roman flatterers, by which they robbed people of their money and their faith in God. How would they be robbing faith from God? In their faith in God. Well, what Luther's saying is that they were putting their trust in their money and not in God. They were putting their trust that they could buy forgiveness, that they could, you know, and that, he said, it's like idolatry. And so they're being robbed of their faith in God. Would that I could prevail upon the booksellers and persuade all who have read them to burn the whole of my booklets on indulgences. And instead of all that I have written on this subject, adopt this proposition. Indulgences are wicked devices of the flatterers of Rome. So you can see just in this 2 years how his thought is. And so he writes, and then he's going to go over what happens. Eck and Emser and their fellow conspirators undertook to instruct me. Remember how I said that they sent people just to, you know, and you know, on the primacy of the Pope. In other words, they didn't come to debate. They wanted to just come and say, look, the Pope says, so shut up. You know, the church has decreed. Here too, not to prove ungrateful to such learned men, I acknowledge that I have profited much from their labors. For while I denied the divine authority of the papacy, I still admitted its human authority. But after hearing and reading the super subtle subtleties of these coxcombs, originally designated for Roman knights who had conquered the city, later with derogatory sense of a fop, someone who pretends to rank in authority, okay, with which they so adroitly prop up their idol, for my mind is not altogether teachable in these matters. I now know for certain that the papacy is the kingdom of Babylon and the power of Nimrod, the mighty hunter. So if you go back to the story of Nimrod, so it's over, right? This is what they put before Luther to, you know, recant, and for obvious reasons. So, you know, hold to this proposition, the papacy is the grand hunting of the Bishop of Rome. So, you know, these are not words that we can agree to disagree on, you know, with the Roman Curate and whatnot. So we're going to skip over the one kind thing, and I just want to go all the way down to looking at the Lord's Supper, because it really, I think, gets, you've heard of John 6, where Jesus says, unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. Luther said that's not about the Lord's Supper, that's about the word. It's not the Lord's Supper. And Protestants and Catholics will disagree with him on that. And then he'll say, these are the passages that are more important, but I want to get down to the stuff that I really want to read today, which is way down here. You've got this writing. I attached it to you. I believe I don't know if I attached the entire thing, but most of it. So close your eyes for a minute while I scroll down so you don't get totally dizzy. I'm almost there. Did I pass it? Couldn't have passed it. The third captivity, here we go. The third captivity of this sacrament is by far the worst wicked abuse of all, in consequence of which there is no opinion more generally held or more firmly believed in the church today than this, that the Mass is a good work and a sacrifice. Okay, I need to highlight this. Somebody else already has, but I'm going to highlight it again. What are we talking about here? So we have communion every Sunday, right? Now, we believe it's giving you the benefits of the sacrifice that happened 2,000 years ago on the cross. But we don't think it's a sacrifice. We get really nervous about that language. Or a good work. In Luther's day, there would be priests in St. Peter's doing private masses. They would do the whole service, just them, because people had paid them to do it, because it was thought that this was a work we do for God, like a sacrifice. So religion typically is this: human beings making sacrifices to God. So God will do something for us. That's a religion. That's almost all religions function that way. And so the church, which is so different than that, had been taken captive by this understanding of the Lord's Supper as a sacrifice, as a good work we do to get ourselves some merit, to please God. We do the sacrifice here. And Luther strongly objected to that. Let me go down here to where we get to some of the good stuff he says on this. Here we go. For where there is word of the promising God, there must necessarily be the faith of an accepting person. It is plain, therefore, that the beginning of our salvation is a faith which clings to the word of the promising God, who, without any effort on our part, in free and unmerited mercy, takes the initiative and offers us the word of his promise. What's happening in the sacrament? That God is giving us something. It makes no sense then to have a private mass. For who? It's the Lord's Supper is to give you the goods to that treasure I talked about last night. That's what the Lord's Supper does. It's for the people. And what do we need in order to receive it? Faith. Faith receives the promise. It's there. Trust in that promise. He sent forth his word and healed them. I love that. So, and I think I've got some more really good stuff underlined here. Close your eyes. I don't think I already passed it. Mine, I shouldn't. It's a long document. We may learn from this that in every promise of God, two things are presented to us: the word and the sign, so that we are to understand the word to be the testament, but the sign to be the sacrament. Thus, in the Mass, the word of Christ is the testament, the covenant, the testament, the promise. Think promise. And the bread and wine are the sacrament. That they're the hosts. They're what brings you the promise in a physical, tangible way. And there is greater power in the word than the sign. So there is greater power in the testament, than the sacrament. What he's saying, in other words, is what makes the bread and wine powerful. It's not the bread and wine, it's the word put together with the elements. They're ordinary bread, it's ordinary wine, and it's ordinary water. That's the power is in the word, which is the ultimate sacrament. For a person can have and use the word or testament apart from the sign or the sacrament. In other words, to get the word and the promise, do you have to have the Lord's Supper? No. And this is one reason, if you didn't know, in addition to not wanting to look like Roman Catholics, that Lutherans oftentimes stopped having communion every Sunday, because they did in Luther's day. Lutherans, they weren't really known as Lutherans, but as it went on, because you don't have to. You get the full thing by just having a service of the word. But why would you want it just that way? Why not? Like ears and taste buds. And Luther never, I don't think he would have ever wanted us not to be having the Lord's Supper every Sunday. But Lutherans stopped having it every Sunday because you didn't have to. And then we also didn't want to look like Roman Catholics. So that was the other reason. Therefore, Luther says, I can hold Mass every day, indeed every hour, for I can set the words of Christ before me, and with them feed and strengthen my faith as often as I choose. This is a truly spiritual eating and drinking. This is what Luther feels John 6 is talking about eating my flesh and drinking my blood. He's talking about having the word come. Let's see, here we go. They come then to profundities, babble of transubstantiation, and endless other metaphysical trivialities, destroy the proper understanding and use of both sacrament and testament together with faith as such, and cause Christ's people to forget their God, as the prophet says, days without number in Jeremiah. Let the others tabulate the various benefits of hearing Mass. You just apply your mind to this, that you may say and believe with the prophet that God has here prepared a table before you in the presence of your enemies. Hence, in the Mass, you must pay closest heed above all to the word of promise, as to the most lavish banquet, your utterly green pastures and sacred still waters, in order that you might esteem this word above everything else, trust it supremely, and cling to it most firmly, even through death and all sins. If you do this, you will obtain not merely those tiny drops and crumbs of the fruits of the Mass, which some have superstitiously invented, but the very fountainhead of life, namely that faith in the word, out of which every good thing flows, as is said in John 4. He who believes in me, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water. And again, whoever drinks of this water that I shall give him, it will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. What is Luther saying here? He's saying the key is the word and your trust in the promise, and that the bread and the wine give you that. But the church had flipped it and made the Lord's Supper into something we do for God, not something God does for us. And Lutherans and Catholics still dialogue about this when it comes to the language of sacrifice in the Mass. And we say, no, there was one sacrifice 2,000 years ago. It's not a sacrifice, it's a giving. It's coming to us. So we'll finish up here with this great little section. For who would not simply stand awestruck before the forgiveness of sins and life everlasting, rather than seeking after them, once he had weighed properly the magnitude of the blessings which come through them, namely, to have God as Father, to be his Son, and heir of all his goods. Against this twofold faintness of ours, we must lay hold on the word of Christ and fix our gaze much more steadfastly on it than on these thoughts of our own weakness. So Luther's going to say, the first thing one might think, well, do I have enough faith? But I'm not that strong of a Christian. Maybe I better do that. No, stop it. I think he's saying, a little faith is all you need. Don't be thinking about that. Just be thinking about what Christ says and his word. This is the part I really love. But I claim what I claim by the right and bequest of another's goodness. Not my goodness, but Christ's goodness. If to him it was not an unworthy thing to bequeath so great a sum to an unworthy person, why should I refuse to accept it because of my unworthiness? So if you think you're unworthy to receive the Lord's Supper, you are worthy. It's like, I'm totally unworthy to receive this gift. But the one who's giving it said, I want you to have it. So am I going to stand and say, well, I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy enough. No, it's by Jesus's bequest, his goodness, that I'm called to receive it. With that same thought, every person ought to fortify his conscience. Oh, sorry, I skipped. Indeed, it is for this very reason that I cherish all the more this unmerited gift, because I am unworthy. You're worth it, but you are unworthy. There's a difference. With that same thought, every person ought to fortify their conscience against all qualms and scruples, so that they may lay hold on the promise of Christ with unwavering faith, and take the greatest care to approach the sacrament, not trusting in confession. Okay, what does he mean? Oh, I can go because I've done a good job confessing my sins. No. Oh, I've done a lot of prayer. I've done a lot of preparation. I fasted. I didn't eat because I did this and did that. No, but rather despairing of all these, with firm confidence in Christ who gives the promise. That's what we do. For as we have said often enough, the word of promise must reign alone here in pure faith. Such faith is the one and only sufficient preparation. That's the only thing you need. So notice what's happening in the Babylonian captivity of the church here when it comes to the Lord's Supper. Luther's trying to give this back to the people, and he's wresting it from the power of the priests and the papacy, and because this was a power they held over the people. You've got to do this and this, and then we'll do the sacrifice for you, which will get you, better in heaven. Or even then, maybe you can come and have the Lord's Supper. And Luther says, no, the only thing you need is not the priest, not the bishop, not all this stuff, is faith. That kind of leaves the Pope out of it. And it leaves Pastor Bill out of it too. It leaves, it's the word, and I am simply a steward of the gift that you as a congregation have been given, and you've said, steward this for us, Pastor Bill, and give this sacrament to the people rightly, and ask only that they have faith. So this is Babylonian captivity of the church, and Luther is very verbose and long. So, but at least that gives you some context. And I just want you to read some of what got him in such trouble at this time. Questions, thoughts, comments?
So this was his first major kind of shooting across the bow, was the communion stuff.
Babylonian captivity and his reformation of the Mass. And by the way, how many sacraments are there? Well, in this writing, one of the other captivities that he talks about that I didn't go over is 7 sacraments. See, these are things that the church owns, that have marriage. You can't be married unless the church, because marriage, and Luther said marriage is beautiful and wonderful, but it's not a sacrament because Jesus didn't tell everybody to be married. And there's no earthly element that goes on. See, like he said, you got to put the word with the sacrament, with the bread and wine. And so there's only water and the Lord's Supper, and bread and wine of the Lord's Supper. And so Luther says there's only 2 sacraments, and those are to bestow the gifts of God on the people. And again, that becomes, fighting words. So the Babylonian captivity, the freedom of a Christian. There are other writings, but these are the big ones. And these are what's sitting in front of him when he's asked to recant and burns. Yeah.
It would be very interesting is because the religion in Germany is all state sponsored.
Yes.
And it's based on 7 sacraments.
Mm.
You can't have the sacraments if you don't pay your tax to the government. That's interesting.
It is interesting. See how you kicked something out the front door and it came back in the back door.
They're refuting everything that he said in the Babylonian captivity.
I think you can make that case.
You are
That's
taxed,
interesting.
a religious tax in Germany.
So didn't we just talk in de-churching that Germany has a very
Very low rate
Oh, my goodness.
so they're
it's
taxed and
infinitesimal.
paying for a church that they don't attend.
that
Most,
they don't attend, but part of them opt out of paying
You can
the
opt
tax,
out.
and if they opt out, they cannot be married or buried in
Oh,
the
fine.
church.
Okay.
and there's a good amount that still just want to get married and buried
Yeah.
in the church.
Is it true that in Germany, the civil marriage is required?
Yes. You have to have a civil service.
Yeah,
to
or
be married.
religiously. And
But
the
you
law-
can have both if you're religious.
And pay tax
And
for
pay
your
tax.
civil marriage.
It's not that big of a tax, to be honest, but then they don't pass any kind of an offering plate,
Not
they,
high.
people just put a few points in.
So when I was there, and Tom and Marilyn, since you guys traveled there a lot more, when, and lived there, yes, of course, when we said that the state pays for the church,
Mhm.
some of the folks objected to that.
Oh, really?
They say it's more nuanced than that. Because they said that the church has loaned the state all kinds of land.
That's probably true.
And so that there's more of a kind of sharing that the church, and you can opt out of it. But still, I think it's almost a distinction without a difference, because bottom line, they don't take an offering during the church, do they?
Right, no.
Because the church is funded through the state. It's not a free offering of,
You don't feel like you're putting money in the offering to help
that
that
congregation.
congregation or run that church or
But
put a
do
new
they
roof
have
on a
off
church.
an offering at all?
They do have one, they do pass it, you've seen
It's-
pictures of
Pass
that
the plate.
stick with the thing. And they do, but it's little coins or something. not-
And it's for different special
Yeah,
things.
my wee son knows that.
Yeah,
Are there independent churches then that are not part of the state
Yes.
church?
there are.
Yes.
And do they have to then fund themselves because they don't? So they would be functioning more like here?
More like here. I think that is correct. Would
And
you
that's
say
like
that?
Pentecostal, for sure.
Okay.
There's quite a movement of Pentecostal kind of church.
There are a lot of beautiful churches that are now discos and nightclubs.
Yeah.
Only like,
We
only
have
like
some there too that with
5%
their bars.
claim
at night.
Same thing.
claim to be Christian at all.
Yeah.
Only about 5% church. In Wittenberg, it's a little higher. When I was there, it was like 8% or 9%, my guide at the time said, but we'll see what our guide says now about that, so. So bottom line, don't have the state get in the church's business and vice versa, maybe, it's not good. It's good for a congregation to support. And just think about it, when you give in the offering plate, you know what you're giving to? What you just read Luther talk about, the word. You're giving so the word can be given, proclaimed in word and sacrament, along with word and sacrament. So these themes still ring true. And they would be great for us. I don't know if our guide will be Lutheran or Catholic, or what, actually. I don't know what our guide will be, but it would be great to have a priest. Because I told this to my Thursday morning class. What I discovered in my sabbatical, as I listened and went to different churches and I listened to their perspective, and then I listened to what people think about Lutherans, and most of the time they didn't, especially in the Catholic sense, they have no idea. They're not reflecting real Lutheran convictions, and I get worried I'm reflecting real Catholic convictions today. So it'd be really interesting to have a priest talk about, but it's still, the mass is still considered a sacrifice of such to God, so and we don't like that. Okay, please.
It might be a little off topic, but
That's okay.
I went to an all-girls Catholic college, and so I was the little Lutheran that ran around.
I'd forgotten that. That's
Anyway, and where does, do they still, they still believe in purgatory
Yes.
currently? I don't,
yeah.
how?
Yeah, sound like a good Lutheran girl. Do we have other Catholic folks who could respond to that? How do they still believe in that?
So, so I'm talking to my mom,
Yeah,
and I started talking to my mom. My parents are, they're not But they are Catholic, and I mean, they are in their eighties, and they are not afraid to meet, they are
They are good.
solid in their
Catholic
faith,
people.
and they're faithful people.
Yeah.
And my mom would never say a bad thing about, in her eighties, she's got a little more. And I was talking to her, and she went to Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school, and Paul University. She taught, and so I was talking, this was just like 3 months ago, I was talking about Luther, going to Lutheran. I said, it's just by faith alone, right? And she's like, what? And I said, well, you just, it's by faith. Huh? That's literally what she said. There was this long pause, and she went, huh? And I said, well, how about the Cubs? The Cubs, or the other Bears, actually, it was the Bears. Let's talk about their, but no, so I mean, they're,
I just
that's
had a
just a different
similar
belief.
reaction. I had a
And
similar conversation with my mom a couple of weeks ago, because I grew up Catholic,
Yeah.
Catholic school, all of that. My mom's almost 93 and still a very staunch believer. But actually, she's starting to question a little bit, because I made
Yeah.
the.
No, my
my
mom was
faith
not.
no
for it.
statement to her, and she goes,
You're
I
gonna
didn't
find
think
out.
about that. Huh?
We have a thing,
Yeah.
whenever Sandy's mom wasn't sure of something about, she'd say, I don't know about that.
It's,
Well, my mom is, well, how about that?
Yeah.
Isn't
So,
that-
so
isn't that
how do they
special?
still
No,
believe
how
in
about that?
purgatory?
It's like, how do
They believe
I can
that
ask.
faith,
I'm gonna talk to them today.
yeah,
Yeah.
faith and works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Works
Yeah.
must accompany faith.
Right.
And they believe absolutely in faith and absolutely in grace, but they don't want the alone in there.
Actually, that was the part, was that, my mom, you don't have to do good, you just have to.
Yeah.
Oh, that was not fun.
That is not something that she would have been taught in the Catholic Church, I don't think, because, like contrition, for instance, has 3 parts. You're sorry for your sin, you do that, and then you have acts of contrition. So you have to do stuff in order to receive penance. You have to receive
penance.
forgiveness. And Lutherans said, no, if you're sorry and you trust the absolution, that's it. Whatever you do after that is fruits of repentance. It's not required. And because it becomes works righteous for us. So the Catholic Church, though, I believe, still would say, no, look, and they'll disagree with our view of Paul. And in fact, they love what's called the new perspective on Paul, because the new perspective on Paul says that when Paul says by faith alone, he's talking about how you get in, not how you stay in. You got to have works to stay in. That's in essence the summary of the new perspective on Paul. That's the way they get around what Paul says. See, so the Catholic Church with purgatory is like, well, of course we're going to die and not have enough merit.
Yeah.
Because our works aren't, we have faith, but they're not good enough. So you go to purgatory to do more merit to get into heaven.
And that's one reason why Catholics will pray for their loved ones that are deceased. To
Because
get them
they
out
are,
of purgatory.
yes, they are.
To help
And
them
Lutherans
out.
don't pray for those who have gone before necessarily. We pray in thanks for them, but we don't pray for them like they need something.
I have a lot of Filipino nurse friends, and when people die, they meet every night, like for 2 weeks, and do the rosary.
Yeah.
And then on the 40th day or something of the anniversary of the death, they meet and do the rosary.
And is that as a help to the
Yeah,
person
yeah,
who's
helps the
died?
person out the ladder, so.
My college friend was her husband had died, and she was just beside herself about this whole purgatory thing. And I had to say in my quiet little voice, well, I believe as a Lutheran. You're saved by faith alone. She kind of looked at me.
Yeah. I don't want to believe that I want it to be, but it's just kind of inescapable. And that's still a thing,
It is.
even though there was this, if you want to do some reading on this, the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification between the Lutheran World Federation and the Roman Catholic Ecumenical Church. But so they really went, they took a big step towards the more Lutheran perspective, but they can't go all the way. They can't. And actually, the irony of that is everybody signed it. They made this big thing. It's a big breakthrough. And the next week, the Pope did 3 different indulgences. So it's like, oh, you know, but I still think it was a great achievement and a great work to try and bring reconciliation. But that's where the church still, and just think how that works.
I had a whole class in that, in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Like,
But,
religion class.
and you know what? If you got to do a lot of good works, if you got to do the mass and do that as a sacrifice to God, because it's going to get you less time in purgatory. Well, that's some pretty powerful motivation to get up on Sunday morning or go on Saturday night and do mass.
Yeah.
Because see, it's doing something. And we say, no, the reason you come is you need faith and the word is going to get to you that way, you know, and God wants to give you this gift. So come and get it. All right, Paul, and then we'll finish.
Well,
up.
it's just interesting because, years ago, I was in this lady's house, for my job, and while we were doing our work, we were talking about matters of faith and whatnot. And, we were talking about faith and confession and such, and she said, she was agreeing with just about everything I was saying. And I said, how can you agree if you're a Catholic? And she says, well, we have this priest who leads this Bible study. And that's what he's telling us. So
There you
there are some of those.
That's right. There, and I think that's perfect, Paul, a perfect way to finish this part of the conversation. There's a lot of diversity in the Catholic world and what parish, what priest, when it comes to how much they push some of this and how, you know, there were bishops in the Roman Catholic Church of Luther's day that when they read the Augsburg Confession, they said, well, this is just the Christian faith. What's the big deal? So, all right. Let me close this. Thank you, God, for this great conversation. Just be with us as we get prepared for this great sojourn together in Germany and seeing many sites and just diving into the Reformation more and just continue to bring us together as a group and watch over our preparation and keep us healthy. And we place all of this in your care. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Can I ask one question? How are people getting to the airport here?
Yes.
We haven't talked about that.
We have not discussed that and we need to. So,
Because I want to know if I need to make a reservation somewhere or
right.
what are we doing?
She does not.
Well, the airport, you could reserve within the
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's tackle that. Let's come back ready with our next get together.
Okay.
Although you won't, well, yeah, you'll
Yeah, I'll
be
be
there.
here.
So, and let's have some ideas about that. I think probably what makes the most sense is carpooling, truthfully. I'm thinking that I might be able to get because we leave when? We leave on a Saturday. I think I'll be able to get like my daughter to take Sandy and I, but we'd have room for a couple others and maybe that's true for others. It's not an early flight though. So
Do the
No,
shuttle.
it's not.
you can do the shuttle. Yeah.
Is it
absolutely.
3 hours we need to be there early?
Yes, for the international stuff. I think that's still the going.
Okay.
And if you want to go over, you can get your, well, let's see, you got Clear and you got, what's the one that you can do internationally?
Global entry. Global entry is coming back.
Global Entry.
That's coming back. That's
Yeah.
not going.
But you have to go over and make an appointment.
You gotta do an interview.
Yeah, you gotta go do an interview and it might be too late.
Make an appointment.
It's called Global Entry and it just speeds you coming back.
You get another idea.
You get another idea.
Why are we just not learning about that?
Don't worry about it.
Or you don't need, sometimes it's the line, sometimes the line can say.
You only need to worry about that if
It's
you don't
exact,
have
and
to
it's gonna be 10 minutes of your life. You can go.
No, you're fine. You do not need global entry. You don't need Clear. You just need to get to the airport. Plenty of time. And breathe. And breathe. You're just fine.
Wonderful.
You don't need it.
Okay.
My God.
Yes, okay.
What a part of the.
The real thing was they don't care.
Sorry, everybody, I was just.
When are you having?
My next thought was.
I won't join you.
Gonna drive away absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe, don't show up.
No.
Research. Like, I was very comfortable with the way it went. Now, everyone's like, well, of course we're 100%. I'm like, that's a bad place to be, because we're not all there. We're not all there.
If everybody
Right.
was 100% on that, we would fit everybody in here for two services. Feel free. That would have been good.
The group like that, you always think you get one comment because everyone wants to talk, right?
I know.
Anyway, your comment was well said.
Well, I'm here on it.
Thanks, everybody, for the lunch. That was so great.
This apparently is something. I thought part of the thing that, people like me like yours.
When did you want to run by?
Luther was the fact that they were tired
Oh,
of revenues
not
leaving
bad,
their
right.
provinces and going.
Yeah.
Is that?
No, I think that's probably, I think when it comes to Frederick,
That might be.
and yes, what came known as the small cog league.
Could probably.
No question that the resources going to Rome, they were sick of.
Yes.
But I don't think that would have been the total rebellion, because they were getting benefits by being a part of the whole movement.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think the thing for Frederick is, I really believe that Luther was his
But
captain.
Arnold, huh?
I mean,
I would use that Trader Joe's.
Luther put,
Yum, yum.
you know, Frederick wants his big university. And to go to talk, to get instructed by Luther the Great. I think, you know, I think.
Well, there are other centers of academia in those things. Heidelberg has already been in operation way before.
Absolutely, and that's what I say though. Luther was making this little university in Wittenberg. Frederick's like,
Dragging it up to the end of the.
that's right, that, no, but I know that there was a tension between Rome. I think it was a factor, I'm not sure it was the biggest,
Okay.
cause then you throw on, just like the whole Reformation, which like you said, it was a combination of political and religious. I mean, the small cog league that presented the Wartburg Confession, when you get there, they were putting themselves on the line.
I don't know.
Now, did they do that just purely out of political?
I don't know the best.
I don't think so. I think the Reformation had, you know, the ideas, the religious vision had
So many
gone.
things had to come in at the
Yeah.
same time.
You know, I tell you
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
The reference.
somebody.
Yeah.
Because it had been bubbled up before.
Oh, absolutely.
Maxed out and
Anybody
But his wife just.
When is the Holy Roman?
Oh, my goodness.
That goes up.
That would have been, that's a good question.
That Charlotte, I forget.
Physics major, I don't know shit. I mean,
Your history,
I knew it's history, but.
well, which was really good. See, I didn't know that. Obviously, I'm like this as a sissy
I had a
thing.
classic education.
But finding out would be interesting. The reason I say that
Yeah.
is, why did I bring that up? What were we just talking about? Oh, no. When you said things had to come together, it had
Yes.
happened before, but that didn't go anywhere.
They weren't all synced.
The other thing that was going on, which you've heard me talk about and we've talked about, is that the Ottoman Turks were right on the board. They
Knocking
were,
at the door.
Prince, you know,
Knocking at the door.
Emperor Charles, he's not concerned about this stupid little German monk. You know, he's concerned that the Ottoman, the Turks are gonna overrun Europe.
That's a good point.
And
That's a
so
great
if that hadn't been happening, Charles might have come in and squashed Frederick and the Schmalkald League way before he did.
Now, I remember that dynamic.
Yes.
He had bigger things on his.
He
mind.
had bigger